SMU Hispanic Alumni Association and our fellow entrepreneurship programs at SMU, including those from Lyle School of Engineering, the Cox Business School, the Meadow School of Arts, and the Dedman School of Law. Finally, special thanks goes out to the Mission Foods Texas-Mexico Center for their promotional partnership. My name is Jennifer Ebinger, and I direct the Office of Engaged Learning. Our team reports directly to the SMU's provost. I would like to also introduce to you my colleague, Camille McCallum, who is the program specialist for our entrepreneurship arm. She did all the planning and preparation for today's event and will serve as the technical facilitator for our discussion. If you have not heard of our work, the Office of Engaged Learning supports undergraduate research as well as campus-wide entrepreneurship initiatives. Within our family of programs is the new Incubator at SMU. The idea of this space was born in the summer of 2018, and after a few bumps and turns, we softly launched the space in the fall of 2019. Since then, more than 40 organizations have come to call the Incubator at SMU their world headquarters. In the coming months, you all will have access to our new website and see that our membership includes social, creative, arts, corporate, and tech ventures. And our founders and teams are comprised of undergraduates, graduates, alumni, and SMU faculty and staff. Very much a startup in our own right, the Incubator at SMU has designed a strategy that supports our members through connection, funding, and education. This includes building a strong mentoring network, engaging in partnership with a wellspring of talent from SMU and the Dallas community, providing programming to build entrepreneurial skills and mindsets, and helping our members gain access to funding, both to jumpstart and accelerate their ventures. Today, we're excited to bring to you programming about digital trade under the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement. We hope that this is the first in a series which will help us understand how this exchange could make our region a global powerhouse, how important it is for established businesses to pivot and build capacity for digital trade across borders, and that there is this enormous opportunity for startups to build capacity themselves for digital trade from the ground level, which is so much easier to do than doing this within an existing or established organization. I would like to introduce our lineup for today. Facilitating today's session is Carlos Carpizo. Carlos is an SMU Cox MBA alum, one of our mentors and residents here at the Incubator. He is founder of Cosmos and author of a new book coming out later this year, At Risk of Greatness, Reimagining Youth Outcomes Through the Intersection of Art and Technology. Our roundtable panelists include Andres Alvarez, SMU Dedman Law alumni, and a foreign legal consultant for the Foley and Lardner Law Firm. And Armando Beteta, the Managing Director of Global Trade in the Latin American Business Center at Ernst & Young. We will hear from them a bit later and after our keynote address from Francisco de la Torre, Consul General at the Consulate of Mexico in Dallas. Consul General de la Torre arrived in Dallas June of 2016. Since then, he continues his role through a second Mexican president has promoted business links between Texas and Mexico with a yearly trade volume of almost 190 billion. I appreciate that, like me, he also has children in Dallas Independent School District. Thank you for supporting the ISD. And so I would just ask now, Consul General, if you would take it from here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Thank you so much. And thank you for the kind invitation from SMU. Sometimes I think I'm from the SMU family. I've been here the last 4 years, and now many colleges and universities may not hear this, but the truth is that with the Texas-Mexico Mission Center at SMU and the proximity we have and all the things we do with the incubator, with the provost office, with so many people at SMU, we feel at home at the Mexican consulate whenever someone says SMU. Thank you for the kind invitation to begin with. Um, I think that the timing is perfect to talk about this panel. Electronic digital trade is trending with the pandemic. For good or for wrong, it is trending right now. And the USMCA is the most comprehensive and high standard trade agreement ever negotiated. And it includes, of course, this trade and digital chapter. It fully updates, modernizes, rebalances the former NAFTA to meet the challenges of nowadays economy and to ensure that Mexican, American, Canadian workers, farmers, ranchers, businesses, including, of course, small and medium-sized, share in the benefits of the agreement. Um, Before this, before with the NAFTA, we didn't even have knowledge about iPhones, iPads, or the Amazon, or nothing. And this is absolutely new. I think that besides the rules that were set upon this negotiation between the three countries, many things aren't getting built right now. We we do have lawyers specialized, for example, in electronic trade or digital trade, but many things are new for them, even under the umbrella of the USMCA. Um, in recognition that digital trade represents enormous value to the North American economy and plays and will play a critical role in fostering economic growth and innovation. Things will be different from the world we're coming to the world we're going after the pandemic, after the COVID-19. And many things will be better or different due to electronic trade in North America. I think that, again, and this is a Spanish phrase, para bien o para mal, for good or for wrong, uh, this set of rules will help to recover many parts of the economy that are now very upset, very, um, very wrong, very golpeadas due to the pandemic. And it is very important that the things we build together from now on are based on this USMCA rules that many people help to draft first and then to negotiate. And let me tell you the truth, we still think that uh, we have challenges. Although we have the rules, we'll still have challenges regarding the digital trade in Mexico. The first challenge that we see, and I'm not going to talk about the rules because we got experts to do that, but I'm going to tell you about the challenges we got. I strongly believe that even though it's trending and improving and growing, the difference between digital trade among the three countries is different. So we will have to invest uh, very heavy resources in trying to balance the digital trade among the three societies, the three communities, the digital, the importance of digital trade in the United States and then Canada, it's not the same as in Mexico. So we have to do our work to make people understand that digital trade is the next thing that will make the economy recover now with the social distance that we have. The other thing that I wrote about as a challenge um, will be coordinating, and this is not set in the rules of the USMCA. We have to coordinate efforts as a region regarding threats in the cyberspace. There's no set of rules of this in the USMCA, but considering what it's coming regarding viruses, not only physical viruses like COVID, but cyber viruses, it is very important that we coordinate answers and responses and first responders regarding digital trade together. If there's a country that thinks that can do something alone right now among the three countries, they're wrong. We're working in this together. If digital trade is uh, vulnerable in Mexico, it will be vulnerable in the United States and in Canada too. We have to work together as a second challenge. And the other thing that I have here is as a challenge. Despite the rules that were set together, we have to work, at least from a Mexican point of view, we have to work with a legal framework in Mexico to cover all the little spaces and the gaps that we have in the legislation for working within Mexico. So we can work together, the three countries. Again, and I would like to finish with this, digital trade and electronic trade, we didn't know how important it was 2 years ago when we were negotiating the rules of it among the three countries. But from now on, considering the rules of the world after pandemic.
¿Terminas un webinar?
Sorry? Someone talk? Thank you so much. This is the floor for the discussion. Thank you so much for the invitation. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, dear Consul. Great kickoff for this roundtable. Thank you very much. And
you told me, Carlos, and thank you so much. Personalized thanks to you for this invitation. And you told me 5 minutes, and I took 5 minutes. Thank you so much.
That's awesome. You were perfectly on time. So thank you very much for keeping us on time too. As the Consul indicated, this is the most comprehensive and advanced agreement that has brought our region into the 21st century, and unbeknownst to us, prepared now better for the post-COVID-19 world that we are going to start living, already today. So as an introduction, the USMCA agreement, you might also hear the TMEC, TEMEC, is the exact same thing. It's just a Spanish acronym for the USMCA. It goes into full force on July 1st. And the great advantage is that it's shielded from political influence and brings certainty to investments in the region. Why? Because it'll have at the very least a 16-year run. Why? Because it's going to be reviewed after 6 years. That's in 2026. But if it were decided by all countries to cancel it, then it would still run for another 10 years, which takes us to these 16 years. And it can very well be extended, and hopefully will be extended for another 6 years. So it can run until 2042. And as Jen indicated, it's critical that we team among the three countries in North America to maintain our competitiveness with China and the East. Jen mentioned 190 billion trade. That's very, very important for the world, for our region. And it's very true, dear Consul, that as you mentioned, challenges, which there are plenty, there are also many more opportunities. And hopefully you'll get from the great roundtable participants today a good balance on both the challenges and the opportunities. And of course, being in the incubator, particularly for entrepreneurs, because I think there's plenty of them. So with that, let's just kick off the roundtable. And thank you very much again, Andres and Armando. The first question is, what is digital trade? Let's start by defining what is digital trade.
Right. Thank you, Carlos. Armando, you want to?
If you want to start, Andres is fine. There's no problem.
Perfect. First, thank you, Jennifer, Camille, Consul, Carlos, Armando, for putting this together. It's wonderful to be here with you guys. And to answer the question, I guess let's start from making the difference between e-commerce and digital trade. Because this chapter, the one we're going to discuss today, talks about digital trade. And although it has some implications for e-commerce, it's mostly about digital trade. Let me explain. E-commerce refers to any trade in goods and services through an electronic platform, either Amazon or eBay or any of these platforms that are out there. So basically, we all have purchased, something from one of these platforms, and we get it in the mail or by courier or whatever. But digital trade, it's referred to that trade made in intangible goods. either books or movies or pictures or all of these content that can be traded and that you can purchase and receive online and consume online. So I guess that's not to focus a little bit the framework, the conversation. This chapter refers to digital trade, and it has some. It touches a little bit on e-commerce because that's the main. Let's call it the gender, the big umbrella. While digital trade is the portion of that covers this trading untangible goods or services.
And if I might add there, Andres, I think what is relevant here and the great difference between the NAFTA and the USMCA is that the NAFTA, of course, focus on tangible goods and services. And the trade and the benefits that were provided for the products that originated in either Canada, Mexico, or the US were the ones that were receiving the duty preference or the benefit of importing them duty-free. And of course, for that purpose, you had to qualify a product as originating in order to benefit from that preference. Of course, the origination requires a lot of study. You have to look at the rule of origin. You have to figure out what type of manufacturer a product has. Of course, it has to be in US, Mexico, or Canada. You have to look at what type of components the product is made of and see if that transformation or that production of that good allows that product to be traded duty-free. In the case of, as you were saying, digital trade, we're talking about intangibles. So these analysis that I'm talking about is not applicable. It's basically a electronic or an intangible that is being traded between the countries. And of course, as you stated, we could not have that when we had NAFTA because we didn't have those services or those goods, let's call them intangible goods at that point.
And I would like to add, Armando, that culture is now digital as well, right? And there's a lot of culture that is born digital, and it goes beyond music and visual arts. We're talking, especially now with the pandemic, museums or festivals, right? There's a lot of creative industries that go beyond marketing and entertainment, which are the creative industries that we're all familiar with, that could be part of these digital trade. For example, education, right? Now that kids are taking lessons at home, well, there's nothing preventing from them taking a lesson from someone in Mexico, right? And that's a digital asset that is being or that is crossing the border over the internet, right? So excellent, thank you so much. So the next question is, what is most relevant to you in the USMCA? Armando, let's go with you then.
Sure. Yeah, with regards to these to digital trade, I believe the most relevant piece of it has to do with the fact that these type of goods, let's call them intangible goods, are not going to be taxed by the governments when being transferred from one country to the other. Why is this important? It's specifically important because, as you may be aware, the different governments around the world have been trying to figure out how to tax digital goods, basically. It's been very difficult for them to identify them, first of all, and then once identified, how can you actually tax those types of goods, basically? So, but having said that, there's a very strong intent by around the world to tax digital trade. Now, the WTO, since 1998, established a moratorium for the taxing of these goods. This moratorium has been extended every 2 years, and we have a deadline by June to define if this type of trade will be taxed. Now, what's important about the USMCA is that it includes a specific provision that exempts the trading of these goods between North America to be taxed. So we are blended. We have a waiver for this. So it's amazing, actually. Something we have some certainty, provides legal certainty for the trade that is going to take place within North America to avoid the imposition of duties, the imposition of merchandise processing fees, etc.
Great, Andres.
Right. It's very important. I think it's what the first thing is the actual recognition. Typically, reality supersedes the law or the legal framework. Basically, legal issues are one step behind reality most of the time. And so this recognition on digital trade and its importance, it's one of the most relevant aspects. First, because of what Armando just mentioned, but also, as I was mentioning earlier, there are some express recognitions to very important points related to actual e-commerce, not only to digital trade, but first, the upholding of the importance of electronic signatures and authentication procedures, which have been, at least in Mexican law, have been in place for almost 15, 20 years, to 15 years approximately. And for some reason, they have not been that used in Mexico, but there's also an important portion dedicated to privacy of personal information, and collaboration between the countries as what Mr. De La Torre was mentioning, the establishment of cybersecurity, let me call it task force for lack of a better word, to work together to prevent cyber incidents and to protect consumer rights in the digital space. And so all of these are put together nicely, let me say it that way, in this chapter to protect consumers and users of digital products in the internet, or at least try to protect them in as much as possible. I think that's also a relevant matter that's worth mentioning, the formal recognition of digital trade in the economy and all the aspects to protect it.
All very relevant, absolutely. And the one I would like to add for me, as an entrepreneur and from an industry standpoint, is we all know that there's a shortfall or a gap in the number of qualified resources, particularly on programming, for example, right? And what this new agreement allows is for more minds to be exported cross-border, where it happens between the US and Mexico or from Mexico to the US is really irrelevant. The important thing is that minds can be exported, work can be done remotely. With technology, work is no longer a place, it's a function. And hopefully this will help us bridge that gap in qualified resources without people ever having to migrate, which is awesome, because then nobody wants to migrate if they don't have to, if they have good jobs in their own communities. I think that's another relevant aspect. And something that you mentioned, Andres, I think is a good segue into a follow-up question, which is the cultural differences, right, between Mexico and the US. Maybe bureaucracy being one of them. So, do you see a cultural change as a result of this agreement?
It's actually it's a good question. It's hard to assess whether this agreement in and of itself will be, will come with a cultural change, because this environment, not the one we're living on the COVID situation, but the digital environment has been around for a few years now. And there has not been that much adoption, I guess, at least in Mexico, maybe because of technology challenged people like myself, that kind of, for me, the internet is kind of like airplanes. They're there, but who knows how they work? You have this big steel thing flying, and you're up there, and you keep your fingers crossed. And the internet as well. You suddenly push a button and buy something, or watch a movie, or do something. Perhaps this COVID-19 situation will help to that cultural change, because we're now realizing that some of the things that we rather do physically, you can actually do it online. Like, as Jennifer was mentioned earlier, we have people from all over the country, even from Mexico, joining to this roundtable, which is awesome. Otherwise, if we have done this in an auditorium at SMU, which would be great and beautiful, but not everybody would have the opportunity to do this. So this, I guess, the driver for cultural change is more situational, for me at least, than the actual framework, although I think it helps.
Sure. So Armando, do you agree fully with Andres, or?
I totally agree. I totally agree. And one thing that it's at least sort of has given sort of pop up to me with this new USMCA with regards to culture has to do with one specific provision that actually talks about electronic signatures. As you know, we in Mexico, and the government in Mexico is very formalistic. We are trying to be very conservative, and also to make sure that the laws are not broken. We usually want something, an original signature, for example, in the documents. No, that is changing now, and it started to change when NAFTA started. Well, I can see Paco there. That is not necessarily, but yeah, and that's precisely where I'm going, Paco, because I think it's going to be a struggle at a certain point, even for the government, to acknowledge an electronic signature from another party and say, I trust you and I believe this is correct. But under this agreement, the electronic signatures must be recognized by the three nations. So it's going to be interesting to see how things develop when implementing this, basically, and see how the Mexican government is going to be accepting all of these electronic signatures. But of course, it's a way to agilize business, and it's a way that should there. I don't think there's a way back here. I think there's no way back. I think we need to go there, and we'll have to settle for that. So that's something interesting that I noted here.
Very, very interesting, and I think you're absolutely right. There's no way back, and there's going to be newer technologies as well that are going to help us with that. For example, blockchain, right, and the implementation of smart contracts using the blockchain. Which just as a parenthesis, blockchain is very different from cryptocurrencies, right? So I think that you're absolutely right, Armando. There's new technologies that are going to be implemented, and of course, now that the regulatory framework is there, then that's more of an advantage for entrepreneurs to go after those opportunities and kind of grease the skids to make sure that trade happens faster and better, right? So absolutely, thank you for your great insights.
Definitely. I just wanted to add something as well, Carlos and Andres. Something that it's interesting to see is that it doesn't necessarily have to do with culture, but something that we need to be aware of is that by facilitating the trade in digital services or goods, there's always a risk also of intellectual property violations. And there's always a factor that I'm sure the governments will have to be very careful in making sure that even though we might be able to be trading digital goods without any restrictions, that other type of laws such as intellectual property and industrial property laws are properly met or are properly complied with. Because otherwise that's definitely can be an issue that as cybersecurity, as well as being explained before, is something a similar risk that we could be facing with this type of facilities, basically.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Now, for the benefit of our attendees, we're going into our last question, and then we'll open it up for a Q&A session. You'll be able to, via chat, please send your questions, and then we'll try to answer as many as possible. We hope we're going to have a lot of questions from you, because I know that you are really the experts, not us here on the roundtable, and would love to wrestle with a couple of them, maybe give you answers, and if not, point you in the right direction or take some homework for us or for future series, as Jen indicated. Okay, so this last question before we go to Q&A is very important, because one thing is the spirit of the law, and then it's, well, what happens in reality, right? And all these details that the consul was talking about, and how are they implemented in each country, and then how are they implemented or taken by enterprises. So I'd love to get your expert opinion, Andres and Armando, on how will these changes be implemented, right? Goes full force on July 1st. What happens the next day or the next months or even years?
Yes, I can start if you want, Andres, or?
Please, yes, please go
Yes,
ahead.
sure. I believe the implementation, as you say, Carlos, is the key here. And at this point, everyone is very nervous because of the July 1st coming into effect of the agreement. And we're still missing what is called the uniform regulations, which actually sort of explain in detail how the agreement will be implemented. It is said that it could, they could be ready around June 1st, but it's likely that it's going to be ready a couple of days before the agreement comes into play, and it could even happen after the agreement becomes effective. That's the way that NAFTA happened. So that's something that we need to be careful about. But I wanted to address a story of my previous life. As you know, I used to work for the government before, and I used to work for the NAFTA and the Ministry of Finance at that time. And one of the key issues when NAFTA was being implemented, and it had to do with intellectual property rights, actually, and of course it had to do with more than e-commerce, or what, not necessarily commerce, but trading goods, not trading digital goods, basically. There was NAFTA has a provision that requires the enforcement of intellectual property rights at the border. So as you can see, that is very focused to the tangible goods, to the crossing of physical goods in the border. It's important to point out that while in the agreement, in the NAFTA, it was properly written, and even in the uniform regs, it was properly described, in practice, the implementation was very complicated. And at that time, I was, as I was saying, I was working for the Ministry of Finance, and I was in charge of trying to convince the intellectual property authorities from a Hacienda perspective that the enforcement of intellectual property rights had to be implemented according to the agreement. And it was very complicated up to the point that it never did. And in the case of Mexico, the rules and the regulations were not there in order to avoid or to allow for the enforcement of this provision. So again, the devil is going to be in the details on how to implement the agreement itself. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens in this area.
Indeed, Andres.
The devil is always on the details, my dear Armando. It's indeed, it's going to be interesting how they start, implementing, at least, from my perspective, some of the rules are already there, at least on the Mexican side and partly on the U.S. side. I'm not that familiar with Canadian, but there are privacy laws in place. There are consumer right protections in place. Obviously, cyber crimes are crimes in the three countries. So part of the implementing legislation is already there. The interesting portion will be, as Armando was explaining, how will the countries make those consistent in case they're not. Most of them should be, but in case they're inconsistent, how are they going to make it consistent with the agreement? And that will come in either uniform regulations or some other law amendment during the process.
Great points. Something that I would like to add is, an answer that I got at a conference on trade and immigration put together by the Dallas Fed towards the end of last year, 2019. And, we didn't know when exactly was the USMCA going to, pass, because it was still, being or going through the legislature at the three countries. And also, once it passed, then how fast would it become effective for some of the changes, right? And the question that I got was a very straightforward, which is it is going to take time, because it takes time for not only the governments but for enterprises to learn what the changes are and feel comfortable with implementing those changes. The analogy that I use from an IT standpoint is nobody gets fired for buying Cisco, or at least didn't used to be the case, right? Why? Because Cisco was like the standard for IT. So if you were a procurement officer or a CTO making a decision, then you would buy Cisco. Why? Because who could criticize you for buying Cisco, right? If you had to venture into buying something new, something more leading edge, then you could be questioned. And I think that that's something that's going to happen in a lot of government entities or enterprises. They're going to be allowed to buy some digital assets cross-border without any taxes, but they're going to be a little bit skeptical. They're probably going to look at some others to be the early adopters and see if they face any consequences before they start making their decision in-house to source some of the digital products or services associated with that, buying mines outside of their countries without putting their jobs at risk. So that's just another aspect that I see, and it definitely is going to take time, but it will happen because it's like trends, and not to get political, but like population trends, right? It's clear where they're going. Some people might not like them, but eventually they're going to happen. And I think it's going to be great for us as a region. So Armando, Andres, I see some questions coming in, which is great. We have a poll here for everybody on the screen before we go to the Q&A, and we would love to get your input on these two polling questions, please. Awesome. So Andres, Armando, any thoughts before we go to the Q&A?
Not on my part, I guess. I'm looking forward to hearing some questions, so I think it's worthwhile.
Yes, me neither. Let's go for it.
Awesome. So I'm gonna read them to you. We're gonna go first come, first serve. So this question is from Patrick Rogers, and he's asking, even for businesses that do not cross national lines, how do we see the USMCA TEMEC affecting the acceleration of blockchain in Canada, US, and Mexico? In other words, will it affect acceleration for everyone, not just cross-border multinational businesses? What are our thoughts?
I can take a first shot at that, Andres, if you want to, and then
please go ahead.
Sure. Well, I believe that definitely the blockchain is going to be affected, basically because under the agreement, of course, we usually think about exporters and importers as the main participants in a trade agreement. However, the producers are very relevant here as well. And even if you are a producer that is not actually exporting currently, your product might end up in Mexico. So definitely there's going to be a demand for you should generally accelerate the demand of all products or production in the US, even though you might not necessarily be an exporter, for example. So that's my original take. I don't know if I answer your question, but I don't know, Andres, if you want to add something as well.
Yes, I think one of the relevant portions of this chapter is that it does not require for a presence in either country to develop product and move the digital product from one country to another. So of course, these will, as Carlos was mentioning, and I think Armando earlier as well, this will facilitate transferring all of these digital products from one country to another without barriers or with minimal barriers, which will of course help the acceleration of the technologies, and that would include, of course, blockchain. Blockchain, I think we're not, in Mexico at least, and I think it's not. I don't know how common it is in the U.S. to use blockchains. It's becoming more common, not in Mexico, but it will. I think we will get there in the use of this technology.
Yeah, what I would like to add is that, technology per se is not going to do anything specific, right? It's really the individuals that are going to put it to good use, hopefully. I'd love to piggyback on one thing that you just mentioned, Andres, which is it's really a matter of where do you find qualified resources? And those qualified resources can be anywhere in the North American region, right? So it's a matter of education and of entrepreneurs investing to really get those new technologies, which are not common spread, to be adopted by the individuals that are going to be the pool of qualified resources to implement those technologies, to understand what is the translation between the business need and the technology to actually serve the business need or to create the value add, right? And I think that that flows nicely into the next question from Nancy Hong, which is very kindly asking us if we were 15 to 18 years old. We're not, but we have children, give or take, in those age ranges, Nancy. And knowing what we know, what would we do as a young person to take advantage of this UMCA opportunity? As a startup, how would we be prepared to take advantage of this great opportunity? Good question.
Well, I can also take a first snap at that. I feel definitely impacted because two of my kids actually are involved in what is animation and let's say digital arts. And definitely the fact that my background is as an attorney, actually. So to be honest with you, I'm much more happier than that they are studying that than attorney, to be honest with you. I think in our case, it's more and more complicated in this world to be successful with this changing world. But in the animation area, in the digital area, I think there's the future, the present and the future. So the fact that the USMCA allows for them to export their services to North America and expand, I think that's great. So I think that I take it personally as something very beneficial.
Thank you.
Yes, I agree. I mean, with what you just said, Armando. Take the opportunity. First, you have no limits as to where within North America you can develop something. So I guess the challenge is find the appropriate expertise, as Carlos was mentioning, and then there's no restrictions to go there and start developing a product or a good that you want to start selling or marketing or whatever. That's the opportunity I see in young people that actually were born and raised in the digital era to take advantage of that, because we old chaps, it's harder. I want to go to the store and pick the product myself with my hands and try it on before I buy it. New generations just go to Amazon and just get a pair of shoes and they get it, and if they don't fit, they send it back. It goes beyond me, but that's the generation.
Great insights. Nancy, what I would add is, I would encourage those young adults to look at all the challenges that they're facing now with the pandemic, right? Or that their parents are facing, because being observant of some of the challenges that we're facing as individuals, as families, as society, should give them a lot of ideas on things that they could study or focus on to alleviate some of this pain, which is here to stay. Let's be honest, right? For example, telemedicine. There's a lot of work that goes into telemedicine platforms, and there's significant transferable skills or applications that come from gaming or from esports into that field, telemedicine. I'm not sure if I would be encouraging folks to just go esports or online gaming, but definitely there's a lot of things that they could learn there that are applicable for services that we all need, right? And that are going to be harder to come by physically, and digitally they're going to be much more available. Next question here is from Hiroki Takeuchi. How should USMCA be further upgraded in the aspect of digital trade? In other words, what issues are left unsolved in the current USMCA? That's a tough one.
I would say I'll be happy to respond that in 25 years. Because it tries to regulate the digital trade and digital enterprises, but at this point, who knows what technology will be. I mean, it's good, I guess, for the next 10, 15 years, the development of blockchain, the Internet of Things, those sorts of aspects. But who knows what will be available given the pace that technology is taking, what's going to be available in 25 years down the road that will imply that the USMCA was kept short in that aspect, or was not updated a few years down the road to take into account some emerging technologies as well.
I totally agree with Andres. I think this area in particular is so dynamic that it changes every day. So it's not, I don't even think in 1 year we would be able to cover what's going to be new in tomorrow, I guess, or in a couple of days, actually. This changes so much. So what is important about this agreement is that it should be an umbrella, or as broad as possible, in order to try to cover specifics. But it's a difficult question. I can almost assure you that it's going to be outdated soon. And we're not going to be covering a lot of things that should be covered at this point.
I agree. It's a difficult question, especially because of the acceleration that we're experiencing with all these different technologies and the combination, right? So who knows what the world's going to look like in 5 years. Now, I think that there's a good framework in here to really last for a number of years. And maybe that's a good question to start asking before it's reviewed in 6, right? What changes could make it better, especially to make the region more competitive, which is what we all want, US, Canada, and Mexico. Good question and great answers. The next question is from Mauricio Flores. He's saying, how will the new USMCA treat cross-border technological services? For example, is there a provision in the new agreement that prevents providing or leveraging digital trade services with Mexico resources to a US or Canadian entity? And I'd like to take a stab at that, because what it clearly indicates, in Chapter 19, is that it ensures that data can be transferred cross-border, and that limits on where data can be stored and processed, and this is the human aspect, right, are minimized. And I think that's a key operating word, minimized, thereby enhancing and protecting the global digital ecosystem. So I think that as Armando and Andres well pointed out, is the devil's in the details, right? And that word minimize, how is that going to translate into the regulations, and how much openness are we going to see from government and entities to source human capital cross-border? Andres, Armando, any thoughts on that question?
Very well put. I don't have anything else. I don't know, Andres.
Yes, it's basically structured to be as open as possible, and then again, the key words being as possible. But again, the idea is to integrate the markets. So down the road, what we would like to see, at least, is a free move of technological products, of digital products across the Canadian, the US, and the Mexican border all along. There might be some restrictions to, I can think of sensitive information, for example, healthcare, or those kinds of data that for some reason or that are deemed sensitive and that require special protection. But at least from if you're talking about software development, the actual first, there is no need to deliver a source code to the country where you will operate, and second, you will be able to transfer that software across borders without or with minimum restrictions. And I think that's the intention of the agreement, that we hope to get there sooner rather than later.
Thank you. So,
Carlitos, I have a question.
go ahead, Javier.
I don't know if I'm in line. I don't know how to get in line for the question, but if I'm next or whoever's next, I can wait, whatever.
No, go right ahead. You jump right in, go right ahead.
I was wondering, I was reading somewhere that there's a US-Japan digital trade agreement in place. Are you guys familiar with that? Is there any lessons to be learned from that? You guys know that?
I am not, but I'm going to defer to the other roundtable participants, Javier.
Yeah, I saw that somewhere, and I was just wondering if there's, we learned some lessons already with the Japanese working with the US on this. I just
is it a digital, Javier, a digital, because is it just a digital trade agreement with Japan? Is that your understanding? I'm not familiar with it. But
yeah, it was a couple of years ago it happened, and I just don't know if it's in effect or if it's been working well or not. I just thought I wanted to see with some of our experts if they knew anything about that. I don't know.
Well,
Armando,
we have some homework, I guess.
Yeah, we'll have some homework. I'm not aware of it. I know that there's, of course, a negotiation between the U.S. and Japan on a trade agreement at this point, but not the digital. I haven't seen anything on that. But we can, Javier, take a look.
We'll check it out.
Good homework. Thank you, Javier. As we say in Mexico, better to arrive in time than to be invited. So glad you jumped in, and we know where you live, so we'll get you the answer. Thank you. So the next question is from McDaniel. He's saying, in the framework of education and online classes, online education is a reality and it constitutes an intangible good. How do you envision education in an international level? Students will be taking courses in another country. Also, what can we expect as a generation that has a new skill sets and have to acknowledge cultural differences? I'm not sure if you're clear.
I guess, this is already happening. International online education is been there for a while. You can access, platforms from, it has been more used these days, I guess, because of the pandemic, and you have all these great platforms like Coursera or edX. But all the big universities in China, in the US, in Europe have online platforms. It has to do, I guess, more on the side of, it has two portions to that. And jump in, Armando, Carlos, as you think appropriate. You have two portions. You have the education in and of itself, the how that education will be useful to you in the future, or you have any sort of certification in the future granted by a foreign institution. And then you have a cultural aspect. And the cultural aspect, at least from my perspective, it's hard to get acquainted with a culture online. You have the cultural differences. To actually be able to understand the culture, to participate, you can get a gist of what's going on if you do it online, but you have to be present to kind of get a better understanding of a culture in a particular place. And then, of course, you can talk about the culture on the internet, which it's a whole different thing. That's my take. I'm not sure if I'm responding to the question that McDaniel asked, but that would be my take.
I would agree with you, Andres. I would only add that I think it depends a lot in the type of what you're studying. Depending on what you're studying,
Right.
some careers are, I don't think you can take them actually virtually 100%. You
Right.
might need to be physically in a spot in order to properly get that education. Having said that, of course, there's another issue that we might be facing with all of this that we're living right now because of the pandemic of the COVID. We're going to see if the universities have a pushback from the colleges and the university because it's going to be hitting their budget. You know,
Right.
it's much more different if they provide the education online, which might be cheaper. They'll have to justify their fees, in other words. So I think that's another thing that we'll have to be facing with this. No?
No, very,
Well, and
very
then
good
there's, oh,
answers.
pardon, sorry, Carlos. There's the democratization of, of education, because it's available there. It's just a matter of looking for it, and then of course you're right. There are some education that you need to be, on campus to actually be able to do it.
Dear Consul, you have a comment? We cannot hear you.
We
We
cannot
cannot hear you.
we cannot hear you.
I'm not
Now,
mute.
now we
There
can.
you go. Now we
Okay.
can.
Unmuting is very slow in this machine, it seems. Very fast. Take this into account with this very relevant question. It's very probable that, for example, the United States will close borders to immigrants regarding higher education too. So it's not a maybe, it's a when. This will happen, and we have to adapt, not only in North America, but across the world, to different systems of education. And this culturalization needs to be faster or will not be, because online systems will be trending and will be the only option for many people around the world to acquire, to get access to higher education in the United States. Thank you.
No, very well put. And since I'm passionate about this topic, I would like to add something before we start wrapping up. We have many more questions. Sorry, we're not going to get to all of them. Maybe this is a good excuse to do a series on this, because I think there's very good questions that we won't get to. I would make a difference between coursework that is towards a degree or that does not go towards a degree, right? Because college and universities are serving and doing a great job for the population they currently serve on bringing them skills for the 21st century. But there are many young adults that don't have access to that college or university education. And I think that they're going to have more flexibility in some of the training that they're taking, regardless of whether it comes from Mexico or Canada, if they're in the US, or US and Canada, if they're in Mexico. I think that that's topic just for another session in and of itself. So thank you very much for everybody. We want to be respectful of your time. And I think we have one more polling question here.
And while we're polling, Carlos, I'd like to just say thank you to everyone, to our most honored guests, Andres and Armando. Thank you very much. And Consul General de la Torre, thank you so much for being a part of this roundtable discussion today. Carlos, thank you so much. You're such an asset to our entrepreneurship community. We love having you as our mentor in residence, and we are infinitely just so grateful. We're so grateful for you bringing such terrific talent, yourself, and also your friends in this community. Thank you so much for bringing them here. And Camille, thank you. Good job today.
Yes. Thank you very much, Jen, for your kind words.
Yes.
Thank you, Camille.
We'd love to have you all back.
Thank you, dear Consul, Armando and Andres. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks
you
for
for
everybody
having me.
attending. And I think we might be on for a series.
I hope
Thank
so.
you.
Sounds good.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Happy to.
Appreciate it. Thank you.